Hi guys, this is Kenniky. Today I'm here to talk about one of the greatest Melee rivalries in 2018, Plup vs Hungrybox. These two are arguably the current top 2 of Melee, and their sets are constantly back and forth. I'll be looking at all of their matches in 2018 and seeing if I can find any patterns from the data I've gathered. Some of you may be wondering what I'm going to do with the grand final set from EGLX, where it was pretty clear that neither player was playing as well as they could have due to an open door letting cold air into the venue. As it turns out, there's enough data that keeping or removing the EGLX grand final set doesn't have too big of an impact. In this video, the data with the EGLX grands included is going to be the focus, but I'll put the data excluding it as a footnote where it's needed. First off, let's look at the surface facts. Plup and Hungrybox have played 13 sets this year, 3 at Genesis 5, 2 at CFL SmackDown 166, 2 at EGLX 2018, 3 at Nudes Oakland, and 3 at Get On My Level 2018. Of these sets, 5 were in Winners Finals and 8 were in Grand Finals. Hungrybox has won 9 sets to Plup's 4, and is up in game count 31-23, with all of these games being Jigglypuff vs Fox. Looking at set counts, we see that 2 were 3-0s, while 7 sets were 3-1 and 4 sets went to game 5. In each category, Hungrybox wins around 70-75% of the sets, except for 3 game sets, obviously, because you can't win 75% of 2 sets. This actually matches up pretty well with Hungrybox's overall win percentage, which is about 69%, so we can probably conclude that game count doesn't really matter all that much when determining the winner. That is, no matter what the game count, the probability that Hungrybox wins, or Plup wins, is about the same. Knowing this, we can use probabilities to sort of predict how a tournament with both of them in attendance will go, assuming that they both make it to Winners Finals and Grand Finals. It turns out that Hungrybox will end up winning the tournament about 77.5% of the time, and Plup will win about 22.5% of the time, which actually matches up pretty well with their current tournament record of 4-1. The other statistics don't match up as well with the real life data, but the sample size is so small that it really shouldn't be expected to. The real lesson you should take away from this is that you shouldn't get your hopes up too much for another Plup tournament win, since even if he wins Winners Finals, there's still about a 50% chance that Hungrybox will win the tournament. Let's now take a look at stages. We currently have the most data for games on Dreamland 64 and Pokemon Stadium, which makes sense as those are the first counter picks that each player goes to. Battlefield, Fountain of Dreams, and Final Destination follow, with Yoshi's Story lagging behind at only 2 instances so far. Of these stages, Hungrybox has the edge on 3 of them, being Battlefield, Dreamland, and Fountain, while Plup's only winning record is on Stadium. Even though they are technically even on FD, Hungrybox has won the last 3 encounters there, suggesting that Plup may have to opt for a different strategy on that stage. Something else to note is that Hungrybox has a perfect record on Fountain. This is especially interesting because Fountain used to be the starter stage in sets between Hungrybox and Plup until Nudes Oakland, when the starter switched to Battlefield. It's likely that Plup realized he was doing badly on Fountain and decided instead to strike to Battlefield. What's interesting about this is that even though Hungrybox has such a good record on Fountain, it's not a stage choice he opts for. Taking a look at his counter picks, Hungrybox always counterpicks Dreamland if it's available, and Battlefield if it's not. Meanwhile, Plup by and large counterpicks Stadium with FD as a second choice. He's also picked Yoshi's Story twice, but both times were at Genesis, and he hasn't gone for it since. We can actually use this data to find the optimal stage choices in each scenario and simulate sets. Interestingly, using this data means that Hungrybox and Plup should strike to Dreamland, as it's both of their third best stages out of the neutrals. You can see more detailed analysis in the slide here, but all in all, the data suggests that Hungrybox should win about 72% of the time, which is actually fairly close to his real win rate. The final thing I want to look at here is how each player gets their kills. Looking at the data here, we see that Hungrybox gets most of his kills through edge guards, up throw rest, and up air rest, as well as Plup SDing while recovering, often by illusioning too low or having bad firebox angles. Plup meanwhile gets his kills off of up throw up air, up smash, up air, and back air. In order to have a point of comparison, I also gathered data for Hungrybox vs Leffen from the 4 sets that they've had so far in 2018, since their sets are always extremely close and there's a lot of recent data for this matchup. Looking at kills that Hungrybox gets, we see that edgeguarding accounts for roughly 35% of the stocks taken from both Plup and Leffen. However, looking at the next on the list is where it gets interesting. Plup's second most common cause of death is up throw rest, which accounts for about 20% of his deaths. Leffen, on the other hand, has only 6.5% of his deaths attributable to up throw rest. Looking at the data, it seems as though Leffen more often holds a sideways DI when he's in danger of being up throw rested, so he tends to fall victim instead to the strong horizontal finishes that Hungrybox uses to mix up his DI, such as forward smash, forward throw, back air, and dash attack. It's not entirely clear which DI is better, since Hungrybox is clearly capable of combating both options, but it's interesting to see how different Plup and Leffen's defensive options are. Another thing to note is Hungrybox's conversions in missed tech situations. Hungrybox almost always punishes Leffen not teching with jab reset rest, while only about half of Plup's missed techs that are converted into stocks involve jab reset. Examining these situations more closely reveals that Plup's missed techs usually occur on platforms instead of the main stage. This gives Hungrybox no opening to jab reset and forces him to go straight for the rest. Leffen, on the other hand, tends to be put in missed tech situations more on the ground, where the difference in height prevents Hungrybox from floating in directly with the rest and instead requires a jab reset punish first. If we now turn our attention to how Plup and Leffen manage to take out Hungrybox's stocks, we can see that the ways they get their kills are also pretty different. Plup's specialty is clearly up throw up air, with over 30% of his kills being from that tech. Meanwhile for Leffen, up throw up air only accounts for about 18% of the stocks that he takes. Although it is still his second most successful kill option, his usage of it is nowhere near Plup's level. There are two areas that Leffen is clearly the superior to Plup in. Leffen's ability to find raw, almost random up smashes in neutral is incredibly impressive. Although at first glance it doesn't look like Leffen has that big of an edge over Plup in this department, what isn't shown in this data is that most of Leffen's up smashes result from calling out Hungrybox's drift and landing options, while Plup's up smashes are often the result of pressuring Hungrybox while he's on the ground and forcing a reaction in either a shielding or tech chase situation, which have far fewer options for Plup to cover and for Hungrybox to escape on. The other thing that Leffen is pretty good at and rather well known for is his ability to convert off of jab. This is pretty clear from the data as over 10% of Leffen's kills on Hungrybox are from a jab conversion, either into up smash or back air, while Plup's jab conversions only account for about 5% of the stocks that he takes. Clearly these two foxes approach their matches with Hungrybox extremely differently, and it's certainly interesting to see how the two styles compare. And that about does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something. Let me know in the comments what you'd like me to look at next. See you next time!